welcome back, all of you. We're continuing to our last session, which will be about technology. And the first one I would like to invite is Professor Lynn Rother at the University of Lüneburg. And I need my glasses. So. And the title is Learning from Provenance Data. Lynn?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction, for the invitation. I'm speaking to you today as the director of the Provenance Lab, where I'm working with Fabio Mariani and Max Koss. I'm honored to find myself here at the Mauritshuis among distinguished colleagues and earlier speakers. Thank you for bringing us all together. In March this year, the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists published an article on looted heritage in museums, which was picked up by news outlets worldwide. The article sheds light on the acquisition history of the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. Today, the Met is considered one of the world's leading museums, but the authors remind us that even in the 1960s, the largest museum in North America was still playing catch-up. As part of this catch-up process, the Met's leadership aggressively sought major acquisitions and at times embraced antiquity smuggling as a mainstay of museums sourcing, the article further states. As summarized in the headline, the reporters identified 1,109 pieces previously owned by people who had been either indicted or convicted of antiquities crimes. 309 of them are on display. I begin my talk with this investigation because it is the first to extensively use online provenance information of a museum to make claims about looted objects in its collection. This may come as a surprise. After all, the Met and many of its fellow North American museums have built accessible online collections for hundreds of thousands of objects, many including provenances since the early 2000s. In fact, following the Washington Conference Principles on Nazi-Confiscated Art in 1998, the Presidential Advisory Commission on Holocaust Assets and the American Alliance of Museums agreed in 2001 to make all currently available object and provenance information immediately accessible. The results are visible to this day. In this regard, museums in the US are the most transparent. Why then have these online repositories not been used for such investigations before? The answer is simple. They are near impossible to analyze because provenance information is recorded and published as free text. Can neither be queried for complex questions nor analyzed computationally. Because of this, the methodology of the journalists can only scratch the surface. The number of 1,109 potentially looted objects at the Met is exceptionally low, 0.07% of the 1.5 million objects in the Met's collection. The reason that this investigation could not show the actual scope of potentially looted holdings is its reliance on recorded knowledge. The investigation only studied historical facts already known, specifically the names of individuals either indicted or convicted for smuggling objects out of Cambodia during its bloody civil war between 1967 and 1975. But isn't every Cambodian object, to stay with the example, created before the end of colonial rule or the end of the Civil War without an explicit provenance to the contrary suspicious? Isn't this also the case if certain details, such as export dates, are missing, contradictory, or lack sufficient documentation? What if we took, as a matter of principle, the absence, but also the quality and the reliability of the information in a provenance record as indicative of an object with a potential history of looting, theft, or dispossession? Rethinking provenance from a perspective of its absences and ambiguities requires us to rethink how provenance is being recorded and published in the digital age. So what does provenance need to look like so that we can analyze it computationally and obtain answers to complex questions? And to what extent can unique technologies help us when only limited resources are available for both provenance research and cataloging? Let me quickly remind us how provenance texts are written today, especially by US museums. Here's an example from the website of the Art Institute of Chicago. And while the object, André Derin's 1910 painting Kanye is not my favorite work, it lacks some wooden color, one might say, its provenance, it's representative for those in the department of modern art. And I will come back to this example and contrast it with a similarly written one throughout this text. So what can we say about the appearance of this provenance record? First and foremost, it follows the so-called AAM format. The AAM format was introduced by the Guide to Provenance Research, published by the American Alliance of Museums in 2001. It was widely adopted by museums in the US and beyond. The AAM format uses syntax to create limited structure in the provenance and relies on punctuation to convey meaning to the expert reader. Important to understand is, A, the history of each object is recorded in chronological order, ending with its current owner. B, that these records may contain multiple provenance events, as in this example, divided either by a semicolon or a period, here highlighted in green. C, that the semicolon and the period have a different meaning. The semicolon indicates that the transfer was direct between parties, while the period indicates a gap. Through the semicolon in the second line from the bottom, we understand, for example, that the art dealer firm Noedler sold Kanye directly to the Art Institute of Chicago in 1960. The highlighted period in the second line from the top, on the other hand, shows that it is unclear how Louis Lyon acquired the work. It might have come from Galerie Kahnweiler, but there might have also been multiple other parties and locations in between. Periods therefore indicate a gap of unknown length. And D, for what is important to remember, each provenance event consists or can consist of various entities. Here we see known parties, for example, the art dealer Noedler & Co. highlighted in red, locations, New York, for example, highlighted in blue, dates highlighted in gray, and methods of transfer highlighted in turquoise. In order to analyze provenance information on large scale, machines need to be able to identify the type of information and understand its very meaning within a given provenance event and record. In short, they need to have access to machine-readable provenances. The process of transforming texts written for humans to machine-readable data is time and resource intensive. Here we have turned to computational techniques, pioneering the use of artificial intelligence, that is, machine learning on provenance information. The first thing the machine needs to learn is to differentiate one provenance event from the next. The AAM format emphasis on punctuation to separate events comes in handy, because it already provides a syntactical structure dividing events from one another, either by semicolons or periods. The natural language processing task, or NLP, to solve this problem is sentence boundary disambiguation or detection, in short SBD. The purpose of this task is to understand what delimits each provenance event. The challenge, however, is to programmatically disambiguate periods and semicolons that divide events from those that are used for abbreviations or other purposes, here highlighted in yellow. The second task, for which we have trained deep learning models, is to predict the correct category of a given portion of text. Here we have identified another NLP technique, which is called span categorization. This technique allows us to identify the different elements within individual provenance events, that is, parties, dates, locations, and methods of transfer. Span categorization is similar, which is more commonly known to named entity recognition, and that these techniques automatically assign the correct category to portions of text, that is, spans. A particular advantage of span categorization, over named entity recognition, or NER in short, is that categories can overlap, allowing for hierarchical structures of spans. Here, it is applied to a previously extracted event from the Kanye provenance. We begin to tagging the method of transfer with the span sold. We can then identify the date of the event. For example, February 1957 refers to the time of the event. Often you will find also live dates of parties, biographical data, which is not the time of the event. Since span categorization allows us to overlap categories, we can then assign a role to the party involved in the event. Noether & Co. New York is the receiver of the event, that is, those who purchased the work. With the ability to overlap categories, we can extract additional valuable information from the party. For example, the party involved in the event is a group, the span Noether & Co. is its name, and New York is its location. To see how well the NLP techniques can work on actual provenance tags, we conducted an experiment on 11,392 provenance tags from the Art Institute of Chicago, which makes its collection data available through API and data dump. We trained, and I keep this short, we trained deep learning models through the Python library Spicy to undertake both the SBD and span categorization tasks. And without going further into it, it's important to mention that we obtained strong results for both, as expressed in their near perfect accuracy score, known as the F1 score. The experiment shows clearly how promising the use of AI can be for the transformation of provenance tags into machine-readable data as a future way. However, it is only machines. Because we are dealing with the historical complexity of provenance and its status as a historiographic undertaking, AI needs to be embedded in a process supervised by human experts. Another look at the Kanye provenance, this time broken up by events, reveals a number of historical complexities in provenance that cannot be adjudicated by a machine. For example, the first recorded event is probable. It is uncertain whether the object was acquired by Galerie Kahnweiler directly from the artist. We also have a gap between the first and the second event. Here, information is completely missing. This missing information is also the reason why the date of the second event is not clear. We only know that it must have occurred before February 1957. Finally, the second event is recorded based on information obtained from the object itself and archival sources. That means that an expert looked at both and made deductions from them. The type of ambiguous information that machines cannot undoubtedly categorize and which requires expert intervention, we have collected under the acronym VISU, from the Latin de visu, with your own eyes. Without expert control, we run the risk of making information precise, complete, objective, and certain that is not. The four issues are vagueness, incompleteness, subjectivity, and uncertainty. To facilitate the intervention of experts in the structuring of provenance data, we've developed an interface called PROVA. It enables any human to interact with and supervise data extracted from provenance tags without previous technological knowledge. In addition, it allows for real-time integration with external resources such as Wikidata and Zotero, which helps to enrich information more easily. For example, the bibliography of a provenance. I will move on, but you can find a demo on digital-provenance.org/demo. To sum this up, or this advertisement block, here's our workflow to make textual provenance information machine readable. It is a human-in-the-loop approach that combines methods of fast and slow digitization to allow for data quantity while ensuring quality. So why are we going through all this hassle? Because We ultimately want to analyze fully machine-readable provenance data that is true to history's complexities, linked within and across institutions or repositories, and thus enrichable by perspectives that Western museums have lacked for so long. It is only such analysis that can actually give us an understanding of the scale of looting and ultimately pave the way for restitution. For such a strategic rethinking of provenance, we need linked open data, or in short, LOD, a web standard that defines how to publish resource online. Also here, without going into the details, you see how a very short statement sold to Noether & Co. in New York 55 actually looks in a linked open data-based system. The data model we have used here is linked art, and it is an application profile of CDOC CRM, which ICAM has been developing for decades. If museums were to publish provenances as linked open data, questions can be asked from hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of records in the future. For now, we have mastered analyzing the data of a single institution, and so I want to share some preliminary statistical insights for the remaining short part of this talk. The first insight I want to share concerns locations. For this, we zoomed in to examine provenance records from the departments of modern art and painting and sculpture of Europe. What we found is visualized in this heat map. The cities in the darkest red are where the most gaps start. In the upper corner on the left, we also share the exact numbers of the top 3 cities from where we do not know when, through whom, to where, and how the objects moved on. In fact, for an impressive 58% of the analyzed gaps, the last known location before the gap was either Paris, New York, and London. And voila, these cities are incidentally the most active cities of the international art market and have been so for decades, if not centuries. That these cities feature prominently among the locations in provenance events is not surprising, given that art market events such as auctions are generally recorded with a very precise location. But knowing that we are analyzing mainly art market activities here, the fact that most gaps begin in art market locations underlines the often criticized discretion of auction houses, dealers and their buyers. Hence, I cannot stress enough how important it is that more institutions have started to buy and digitize dealer archives on a large scale to overcome the unknowns related to the art market. We have also analyzed provenance records from 5 of the museum's 11 curatorial departments in detail: Arts of Africa, Arts of the Ancient Mediterranean Byzantium, Modern Art, Painting and Sculpture of Europe, and Arts of the Americas. Out of all the 11 departments of the Art Institute of Chicago, only these 5 had a ratio of provenance to object records higher than 50%. In the first step, we counted gaps, or to be precise, the average number of gaps per provenance record per department. We see clearly that 3 departments have only 1 gap per provenance on average, here in red, blue, and turquoise. Modern art, as well as painting and sculpture, are the outliers with a higher average number of gaps per provenance record. Digging a little deeper, we have also calculated the average number per provenance record of what we call initial gaps. An initial gap occurs when there is no evidence of an object's whereabouts between its creation, which we consider its first ownership event, and the following event. We see that the departments with an average number of gaps at or close to 1 are the same departments with 1 initial gap per provenance record. This means, by and large, the provenance gaps in these 3 departments are initial gaps. The same cannot be said for the departments of modern art and painting and sculpture of Europe. Not only do they have more gaps per provenance, they also have fewer initial gaps. In a nutshell, the differences between departments laid bare by these figures point to the underlying biases of legacy provenance practice, themselves the results of epistemological biases in Western academic disciplines. To illustrate this a bit more, I bring back the Kanye example and contrast it with a vessel from the Arts of Africa department. The bias at work here is an epistemological hierarchy. Western-made objects were considered art by default. They have a clearly identifiable maker, and it all fits neatly into the canonical mechanisms of art history. Even if it is not entirely clear how their work may have left the studio, as it is the case for Kanya on the left, still the artist is present in the provenance, even with some uncertainty. On the other hand, non-Western objects were granted art status only at the moment they began circulating in Western-dominated commercial and cultural exchange networks. To put it succinctly, art is in the eyes of the Western collector, and provenance, we are reminded, was initially a marketing tool developed specifically for these eyes. As we can see, this cultural bias manifests prominently in provenance records. There is no mention of a maker in the provenance on the right, and the object's life begins with a stint at the Tribal Arts Gallery in New York. The short provenance for the Benelux vessel on the right draws our attention to another question. Was there any actual research undertaken to understand the object's deeper history? The provenance on the left contains notes suggesting that someone actively researched and documented the object's history. The authors have given the historical sources they used in brackets, an inscription of the words and painting, and a letter from Noether. Because every provenance statement must be considered a hypothesis made by an expert, the recording of sources gives us insight into the quality, scientific reliability, and more important, traceability of a provenance. Such recorded expert subjectivity is entirely missing on the right. It is an almost pseudo-provenance that may have been written by someone in the registrar's office at the administrative moment of accessioning the object. It does not give any hint that further research was undertaken. If we take, and now we're almost at the end, a macro view here, you can see that the use of notes is most pronounced for the departments of modern art and painting and sculpture of Europe. If we not only look at subjectivity, but also at the indicators of uncertainty and vagueness, we obtain a similar chart. I'm not showing their graphs for reason of times. What is important to note is that modern art and painting and sculpture of Europe have far higher percentages of subjective, uncertain, and vague events than the other three departments. The peculiarity of these two statistical outliers is that here the objects originated in Europe and that both departments mainly hold paintings. Paintings from Europe have only traditionally been favored by the art market and benefited from better documentation all along. European paintings have also been prioritized in the US museum provenance research efforts following the Washington Principles. In fact, the early US provenance guidelines stipulated to initially focus on European paintings and Judaica and to continue research as museum resources allow. So what we see here is a direct outcome of this prioritization. The provenance records of these two departments have undergone scientific updating. Sources have been included and hypotheses have been recorded, including their uncertainties and vagueness, all indicators for scholarly judgment. Indeed, the habit of reliably sourcing one's information expressed in the use of notes is a sign of scientific rigor in a field that is working from a highly diverse and highly fragmented historical archives, work it has neglected for much too long. We call the overall statistical observation the Washington Principles effect, an important and quantifiable expenditure of resources spent on works most likely affected by Nazi looting. While it can be explained, it does shape the landscape of knowledge in peculiar ways. The Washington Principles led to focus on European paintings at the expense of other fields. This we can see clearly from the stats. All the other departments do not show the same level of markers of provenance knowledge, production across the board, number of events, number of gaps, other data points. Where there is no research, there are no new events to be discovered. Where there is no research, there is no doubt about its finding. And a closing look, journalist investigation into the online collection of the Met, looking for specific names, can only be the beginning of analyzing collections in particular. if the name of the controversial figure is literally the entire provenance, a low-hanging fruit, what you may say. With the knowledge we have gained from the analysis of another so-called universal museums, we can confidently say that the more granular analysis of the texture of the meta provenances will produce a much more detailed picture of where there are many awfully appropriate objects in the collection. After all, some art crimes hide in plain sight or in plain provenance. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. It's very good that we have three very different subjects for this part, this session part. So we go from computer-read provenances to the impact of 3D. And for that, I would like to invite Lieselore Tisse, who is writing her PhD exactly on that subject. Exactly. Am I right? Yeah. The title is 3D Printing the Mixed Skull. This is the print, by the way. The role of technology to discuss ethical issues surrounding contested heritage in a co-creative way.
Yes, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. So yeah, this is a 3D print. You can also touch it if you want. You can throw it around the room. It doesn't hurt. It might hurt the people whom it was stolen from. So yeah, please consider this. No, but thanks for the introduction. I'm Lieselore Tisse. I'm a PhD candidate at Leiden University and Delft University of Technology, where I conduct research into the implications of 3D printing for the art historical field. So that's really the whole, well, humanity's outlook on technology, basically, and the whole authenticity debate, which is difficult enough in itself, but also what can it mean for these kinds of ethical questions, and also in the practices of technical art historical research, conservation and presentation in museums. And well, I'm going to explain a little bit more about this object in particular, but I just wanted to say that these are usually not the objects that I work with, because usually I'm occupied with copying the collection of the Mauritshuis. You could not have missed the girl with the pearl earring when you entered the museum, so that's one of the things. So if next year there's going to be another loot exhibition and the artworks of the Mauritshuis are missing, then you know it's me, probably. No, but during this research, when I'm scanning artworks of, well, dead artists mostly, the whole reproduction, idea of reproduction and authenticity is difficult in and of itself. And in this sense, I only have to be aware of the, well, right now, Western side of the story and the museums that I'm actually working with. So I keep it very small. And also for the reason that I've worked with decolonization processes when I was an employee at the, well, previously Museum Volkenkunde, but now World Museum Leiden, where I researched the provenance of some objects and whether or not they were looted during World War II. And there I already saw the complexity of the whole discussion, but also the inaccessibility of the whole topic. And that's also why I really enjoy the fact that we're having this symposium here. Because to me it was obviously very hard to understand, also because of its complexity. Well, this whole project with the skull really came to me by accident. Because I was approached by an artist, Daniel Aguilar Ruacalba, of Framer Frames, and he is actually from Mexico, and he approached me because I knew stuff about ethics and reproduction. So I was like, okay, sure, ask me anything. And he basically asked me, well, I want to do this restitution claim for the skull because it's not supposed to be in the Netherlands. And I was like, okay, what are we going to do with this? So I was like, okay, sure, I can see if I'm very interested in it because I'm very passionate about accessibility, inclusion and everything. I really believe that 3D printing could help in those kinds of cases, but why not in restitution as well? So during this presentation, I kind of want to go through the process well, kind of show you the lessons that I've learned throughout this whole process of using 3D printing to understand the needs of others, and to kind of have this discussion of restitution in a more co-creative, inclusive way by actually also hearing the voices of the community of origin. So I took on the challenge with a colleague of mine, Naomi Oosterman of Erasmus University, who is specialized in art trafficking and the whole criminological side of things, and especially in Latin America. And I also saw the value of using these kinds of methods and 3D printing, because there are various examples in which this has already taken place. You can see here an example of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., where they've actually talked to a community of Native Americans about reproducing their skull pin head. And they also had a say in it. There's a whole report about this, and it was done actually pretty well. And in the case of the Amsterdam Museum, they had their Cabra mask reproduced. And it is now being used during Ketikotie, if I pronounce it correctly, probably not. But this replica actually makes it possible to kind of conserve the object and make it part of this living culture as well. So I was thinking, why not? And it is very difficult if it comes to human remains. That's my first lesson learned so far. Because what we are looking at right here is an object that is very complex and has a lot of narratives. It is a Mixtec skull, and it comes from the south of Mexico, from Oaxaca. And the Mixtec community is still alive, and they still do all of their practices just when they did when the skull was looted. And it's currently in the museum collection of the Volkenkunde Museum, and it belongs to the New Savi, and those are the people of the rain. This object was looted and sold to the museum in 1963. But it is an original and a forgery at the same time, because there are plenty of other skulls similar like this. So what happened is that the skull is actually from Oaxaca, Mexico. The mosaics are from there as well. However, there was this dentist, Mr. Pot, who thought, hey, okay, I'll just use these two elements, put them together and create an artwork and sell it for a lot of money. So in this sense, he has commodified an ancestor of the Nusavi people. And Martin Berger of the Volkenkunde Museum has done extensive research and has seen that it is a forgery. So this makes it an object with a lot of narratives. Not only because it was stolen, it is a forgery, it is a commodified human, it is a human being, it is an ancestor of people in a living culture. These other skulls are examples of more skulls that he has forged. So it's terrible. And it is something that because I also worked at the Volkenkunde Museum or the World Museum, I've seen the object so many times, but you never realize it until you work with it. So that was also kind of eye-opening in that sense. Daniel, who initiated the project and approached me, he had the skull scanned. So my job was to 3D print it, actually. And what he did was he scanned it with, I'm not going into too much detail about the whole technology, I can send references and everything. But it was CT scanned at the Leiden University Medical Center, where it still currently has a patient number. Yes, but a very obvious one, so that they don't use it when you ever get in the situation of needing a scan. But the reason for using these kinds of scans, it's a computed tomography, a CT scan, was because the mosaics are made in a different material than the skull. And what CT scanning actually does is that it uses X-ray beams, and it records a 3D model, it basically slices horizontally and vertically that you can put together as a 3D object. And it records the density of materials. So the denser the materials, so metals, for instance, also when you break your arm, you can, or maybe if you step in a nail or something and you see an X-ray image, it's very white. That's exactly what it's doing. But based on this information, you can kind of disconnect the mosaics digitally from the skull without having to hurt the original object, the original forgery. And then this information can be 3D printed. So now I became the forger who forged a forgery, which is very interesting though. And this was done at TU Delft with a Formlabs resin printer, and it is a printer that you can buy at home. So this is also kind of an interesting thing because, well, they own the data, they have the data now as well at Delft. And they already asked me, can we print some small skulls? Because we really like to show that this is a very exceptional object. And I was like, okay. Everybody at home can just 3D print this basically. So that's also kind of an eye-opener. But what this resin printer basically does is it's a tank with photosensitive plastic that's liquid. And it basically beams a laser through well, the material, and it hardens the plastic in the shape that you want it to be. So layer by layer, you kind of extract the object out of this tank of liquid, and then you get a skull. But it's monochrome, because that's also something that you have to keep in mind. Unlike the 3D printed paintings, it is not yet possible to get an object like this to look almost indistinguishable from its original, because the technology is just not advanced enough. So it came out that it was gray when I received it. And then, oh, I'm sorry, I took a lot of time actually painting it by hand. So this kind of solves the problem of having these one-to-one reproductions that everybody can have. But during the whole printing process and the painting process, and I don't believe that they are called the people of the rain by incident, because when at one point I woke up in the middle of the night thinking, I just printed a human skull. Am I not just commodifying this person again? Because even with my good intentions, maybe I'm doing the same thing over again. So that was a really bad thing. And then I was kind of painting the skull and was thinking, yes, I'm very happy about this because I'm spending so much time and effort into making it beautiful and look good. But every time I wanted to paint it, and it's not a joke, it started raining or there was a storm or something. So I was like, okay. It made me kind of think about, okay, I'm really looking at this from a very Western perspective. So that already started to sink in. And, well, it finally really started to sink in when we invited some people from the community of origin over to the Netherlands here a couple of weeks ago, and actually to show them the skull, to talk about this, to hear their story, and to kind of discuss with them what they would think about that skull being there, about the 3D print, because in my mind I had done this great thing. But from a Western perspective, yes, I've really made an effort to help them. But for them, here they were asking for forgiveness for the fact that the skull was there on display, and it was 3D printed and it was scanned without their permission, because nobody asked them. And this also made me realize, sorry, I'm getting emotional because of this, how much this is still part of their culture, and they are still living this culture, while we are constantly looking back at what we have done, they are still doing. So that's what made it even more complex to me, and also, of course, because it's human remains and it is their ancestor that's being commodified all the time, which made me even more aware of my Westernness, and the fact that, and I slowly started, because I was very proud of my 3D print and how I painted it and everything, but yeah, I kind of didn't, I'm not so sure anymore if they would want to have it. So I was like, okay, interesting, how are we going to solve this? So even with good intentions, you still have to really think about what you're actually going to reproduce and why, and from whose perspective you're doing this. So the next time, I would totally first go talk to the community of origin, which is also problematic, of course, because who are you going to talk to? Who are you going to invite? How are you going to get their voices heard? So what we've done is we've 3D printed some smaller skulls. Again, we have reproduced the skull once more. And we went to schools in, well, Daniel did, the artist that I'm also working with, to Mexico to actually tell people there about this object, because a lot of people don't know it's there and that their ancestor is there. And these are some drawings that children made based on kind of the story that he told and how do you think the skull's feeling and, well, how does it fit within your culture and your practices right now? And they were very enthusiastic to have the 3D print, so that was kind of a nice thing, and it made me less sad eventually. Yeah, yeah, because also, I mean, I also talked about it with them a couple of times again, because I'm like, what do I have to do with this skull? Because at first it was such a good idea, but what are we going to do with it? And what they told me was, well, at least we're talking now. And that's something that we didn't do before. Because at first it's like, yes, you will get it, or no, but not a process and not something that we're collaboratively doing. So even though it is hurtful to them, they were very happy with it. So I kind of want to avoid that more people get hurt. So that's why I'm telling this story as well. And the biggest thing, and I know that Kel and Eline will also talk about this, is what about the digital afterlife of a skull like this? Because here we're constantly being technology driven, and we have to 3D scan everything, we have to record everything, but it always sounds good, like a good plan right at that moment. But yeah, who's going to own the data? Who is going to store it? Can it be reproduced? Can others reproduce the skull? How should they use it in the metaverse? Because I can imagine that if people would start playing soccer with the skull as a ball, that would be very hurtful, and it just continues to be hurtful and maybe even grows in the damage that it is doing. So that's also something I wanted to emphasize, is before you even think of scanning something, not just do it. Just think about the method that you're using, who's going to own it, who's going to store it. In the Smithsonian example, they've discussed with the community of origin who's going to keep the data. And also it kind of brings the whole digital divide to the surface, because to us this is accessible, but to them it might not be at all. So that's also something to think about, and it's something that I'm currently working on with SURF, who also provides internet for everybody who's connected to a university, to kind of create a protocol on how to use this, and a kind of a decision-making model, whether or not you should go through with it, the kinds of questions that you should ask yourself. But this is something really big, especially with the advanced methods and easy-to-use methods with which we can record three-dimensional objects nowadays. So if you're going to attend on the second day, you will probably learn more about that as well. So to kind of wrap up, the lessons that I've learned, those are a lot. I've kind of discussed them already during my talk, but it's, even with good intentions, really think before you scan, before you 3D print, and start with the community of origin, even though it is very hard to pinpoint whom you should talk to exactly. And in that sense, I also want to kind of make a reference to the Rijnwoord Academie, because in this case, I speak Spanish, I have a lot of Mexican friends, so communication was easy, but sometimes the cultural differences are just too big, and they offer a course that's called Emotion Networking, which really provides a way to talk to each other without using words, more or less, which also helped me in this case to kind of connect emotionally and based on the senses in a way that where no words are really needed. So I would definitely recommend that. Yeah, and authenticity and narratives come in many forms, and in that sense I think that a reproduction like this can extend the singular object and kind of present one object in multiple ways and tell all of the stories of this particular object, if the community of origin would accept that, of course. And yeah, the technologies are just not accessible to everyone all the time, and could do more damage in the future than you might be aware of right now. So as a closing remark, I would just want to say that yes, in this sense, 3D printing does not change our past actions, but it can help us with the living culture of the people of today. And together, at least right now, we can create our own narrative that hopefully will rewrite the past, or at least make us discuss and talk and create something together instead of us dominating their narrative. So thank you very much for listening. And if you want to know more, reach out to me.
Thank you, Lieselore, for taking us with you in your journey and also for your very honest story. Next, I would like to welcome our guest curators and creative leads of the exhibition Loot 10 Stories, Eline Jongsma and Kel O'Neill. And as said, you can read all the magnificent things they have done already in the booklet. And they are going to tell us more about the exhibition and what led up to it. And the title of their talk is Making Loot 10 Stories, Using Human Scale Storytelling and Immersive Media to Create a Cross-Disciplinary Exhibition.
That is a mouthful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Last presentation of the day.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say very briefly, it's always fun to see what happens when you put a keynote into a PowerPoint. This drop shadow is amazing. It's like a 1980s drop shadow. So welcome to our 1980s presentation about 21st century digital media and, yeah, what we make.
So I think we are actually the only people speaking today who are makers or doing, having an artistic practice. So I don't know if it's true. I missed the very beginning of the day, but I hope that we can contribute to, what people are learning today and what people are finding interesting about all the materials discussed. Like Kel said, or the moderator said, we are the guest curators and creative leads on the exhibition that I think some of you may have already seen, but I think the next step is that people can go to the gallery and see the show. Guest curators and creative leads, we struggled with the title because what Kel and I do is not really, it's an emerging industry, it's an emerging practice. So we're called guest curators and creative leads, but you could give it a different title as well. We were involved with object selection, a little bit of research around some of the colonial objects. We created the overall exhibition framework. We were involved with the design. We created all the digital components, meaning the films and the VR installations. And we co-created the object installation. So a little bit of everything. And Kel and I have worked together as a creative team for the last more than 10 years, maybe even 15 years. And we've always worked with new media, with immersive media, with new technologies. And a reason to do that is because we like to find ways to combine story and the form in which we pour it in a way that works for every individual story that we tell. And oftentimes the kind of stories we tell are a bit tough to handle. We're very audience focused, obviously, because we are storytellers. What you see behind you is a project we just finished called His Name Is My Name. It exists on the Instagram platform. We made it for Instagram. It's a documentary about, it's actually a very personal story. It's research into one of my ancestors who is turned out to be, he was a secret, turned out to be a convicted war criminal in World War II. So we used Instagram to deliver a story about this man, or deliver our research and a narrative, and use Instagram as this sort of ultimate confession. It's a platform that is used for fake confessions, and we just published a real confession. His Name Is My Name, which is, like I said, the name of this project, and Loots share some common DNA. They both look at history through, artistic means, and they take an artistic multidisciplinary approach to the subject matter that is extremely charged. Perhaps using technology for storytelling can help you, refract a little bit. But, in this case, we used an AR filter that you project into your home, and hopefully it teaches you something about current day, neo-Nazi sentiment. Loot is really focused on using virtual reality to transport people to the past, but really to a place, to an imagined place, to a place that is impossible to experience, for any of us in the world, really.
To explain that slightly, we're going to play the trailer now for those of you who haven't seen it. So, yes, please play the trailer. Loot 10 Stories represents a new kind of exhibition, one in which physical objects and their digital representations share space.
It's evidence of the way that my people make art. Why is it still here?
Transporting the user back to a different time, a different place, and exploring the meaning of loot over the course of history.
During the Second World War, the Nazis passed a series of laws which enabled them to rob cultural assets.
There's always something more than the object itself. There's a story behind the object. And at the end of the day, that's what Loot 10 Stories is about.
All right. So the object that you see in front of you right now is a kris that came to us via the Ethnology Museum at the Humboldt Forum. You can get into what the actual history of the kris is in the sort of Western European sense of history through some of the text that you'll see in the exhibition, and also through some of the online resources connected to the exhibition. But I kind of want to take a moment to consider the kris in a different context. When we went to go research the kris and make a photogrammetry scan of the temple that is the setting of one of our VR installations, we met with several people who could give us a little bit more information on not necessarily its origin, but its significance as an object within Balinese culture. We met with an empu, that's a kris maker. We met with the king of Klungkung, which is the region from which it was taken. It's a ceremonial title. He no longer holds any representative power. And we also met with a really wonderful professor named Professor A.A. Bagus Wirawan. And I remember him saying that there are two edges to this knife. There are two sides to history. There is the historical record, which Shiloh was, very good at interrogating when it came to this object and many of the other objects that came from the Ethnology Museum. But then there is an element that he referred to as the supernatural history, the lived history. And I loved the way that he used that, because it wasn't creating a Western, Eastern, Occidental, Oriental dichotomy. It was creating the distinction between the historical, which you can hold as a piece of paper, and something beyond, something that has elements of oral tradition but actually goes into experiential states. And when we were looking at how to actually make this work, it was very important to us that we figured out how to convey the simultaneity of these realities and the simultaneity of different subjective experiences. What you see here is a still from the exhibition hall. You have the kris in a vitrine. You have the headsets. And if you put on the headset, if you're guided into the headset, the kris persists in the digital world, but you find yourself transported to an artist's imagining of that temple in the 19th century when it was the site of a battle. You're immediately after the battle, and you're seeing this object in a completely different context. You are essentially being kicked out of the museum context, in which the museum bestows value on an object by placing it inside a vitrine and telling you that it's valuable. And you're actually seeing it as it once was. And once you take off the glasses, once you take off the VR braille, you can't help but bring that context with you back into the gallery and see not just the object, but the gallery in a different way.
So going back for a moment to earlier practice, earlier work that we've done in which we worked with subjectivity and unknowns and multiple realities, multiple experiences. This is a still from a video installation of a project called Empire. We finished it about 10 years ago, and it was a project about the legacy of Dutch colonialism in 10 different countries, 10 different video installations, 10 different experiences of life as it is now, exploring this sort of contemporary legacy, you know, as it exists in the bloodlines of people and contemporary culture. And what was very much, you know, we're approaching this from a documentary filmmaking perspective, but what was very interesting to us was that we were engaging with a history that wasn't recorded. You know, thinking a lot about archival research right now, today. A lot of people talk about this. It's a way, at least for us, to sort of circumvent, you know, all the things you don't know. This work, Empire, was screened, was created, finished, and screened in countries of origin. So our first audience was always the community that we were filming, and it was a lot of fun to see if we got anything right. So it gave us some confidence. As in Empire, as in Loot, we are dealing with subjectivity and unknown elements of history. In both cases, the underlying content led us in the direction of using artistic interventions and immersive media to create the framework of Loot.
Yeah, so in Loot, these interventions make themselves known in a few different ways. Obviously, we have the VR, which attracts a lot of attention in the press, but there are other interventions. Most notably, the documentaries. I see that the subject of one documentary is actually in the audience right now. Hi. But I want to draw special attention to another object that actually was in the collection of the Ethnology Museum that found its way into a documentary, and the way that it found its way into a documentary. Because as Eline said, form and content for us are inextricable. We can't just say, oh, well, we're going to make a documentary, and what's it going to be about? No, like it has to arise from the story. It has to arise, in this case, from the object. This is a staff that was taken from Moron men in Suriname by people at a missionary station, at a plantation. All that we know is that it was taken forcibly. And it actually says that on the card, which is how the documentary begins. And so we've been in touch with the leading academics of, Moron studies in the past because of Empire. We reached out to them this time. It's a couple. We reached out to them and we were like, what is this object? What can you tell us about it? Richard and Sally Price, and they said, we know absolutely nothing. And so we decided to go through our informal network. This is Onias Landveld. He's a storyteller. He's also a colleague of ours. He's somebody that we've worked on other projects with. And Onias actually is from the same region where this staff, this walking stick, was taken. And he took a picture of the staff to his family, and the results that he got were basically them saying, well, yeah, I recognize it. I recognize it. And Onias himself felt like he recognized it, and that something that he didn't know was a part of him was out there in the world, and that he had to reconnect with it. And so he said, can I go hold it? And we said, we'll try. And the Ethnology Museum was nice enough to open their doors and to open the vitrine, which holds other objects from the region, and to put it into his hands. Notice that he's wearing gloves. That's because of the issue that was talked about earlier, there are poisons on this. So even if it is restituted to Suriname at any point, it will be restituted with the poison, the literal poison of the museum structure on it. But it was a way to humanize these elements of post-colonialism, because post-colonialism as an idea, as an academic concept, means nothing. We're actually talking about lived experience, people's lives. And Onius was nice enough to let us into his.
So Kel is talking about some of the video work that you'll be seeing in the space. This is a photo of, well, actually it's a screenshot of the photogrammetry that is done in order to make the some of the virtual reality experience. You know, some of what you will see in headset is photographed. Photogrammetry just means that it's, you know, there are thousands of photographs taken from all angles. The camera positions you can see, those are the squares in the sky. This is, I'm sure everybody knows this, on top of the Brandenburger Tor, which is a replica, which probably most of you also know.
You were aware of that, right? The Brandenburger Tor currently actually holds a replica and not the original. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So in the gallery downstairs, we have the only remaining, I believe the only remaining head of one of the horses. So we decided to use photogrammetry, recreate history, recreate the moment of loot. This is an object that is less charged than some of the other objects. This is an object that a lot is known about. A lot of research has been done. So, you know, we could use a lot of resources while we were recreating. This is a in-headset shot of the recreation. You know, and why are we doing this? You know, there's something about using virtual reality to communicate a sense of presence. It's not really about telling someone a story necessarily, you know, from A to B to C. Conclusion, you know, put a bow around it, but it's much more about experiencing and feeling. So we were very happy that we had the opportunity to try this with real history, real objects, and transport, you know, people to the past.
And one thing about that sense of transportation or immersion, one of the things that it can do is rearrange context. I mentioned this idea of like, oh, well, we start thinking about the museum. What is the museum? Why the museum? What is this construction? But really what you're doing if you're taking people to an imagined past based on historical research and this supernatural element that we discussed, is that essentially you're creating this context in which people suddenly understand that there's a history to this object, and of course we understand that in our minds, but we start to understand physically that there was a history to this object before it entered the museum. There will be a history to this object most likely after it leaves the museum. And that museums in a way are, or as we understand them, are a blink of the eye. It is a very, very brief time that we have been treating objects like this. Overall, I just think that it's very, very important that, you know, personally, to center this work, it's only possible for me to look at it as 2 years spent in museum culture. Because so much of what we do is we go to a place, we spend a lot of time in a place, we meet a lot of people in that place or in, you know, one part of that place. Here we basically spent 2 years in museum culture. And in a way, this conversation and the lecture that I'll be doing at Leiden next week that's like the end of it, in a way. That's the end of our residency with you. And it's been quite fascinating to see this culture and to see this community, and just in the same way that you can't talk about a community of quote-unquote indigenous people, because a community is, you know, made up of many different individuals that think and feel many different things. One of the things that we've really noticed is that there's a diversity of perspectives in this room. There's a diversity of realities in this room. And when I see Siraj sitting next to Lars Christian Koch, I think, my God, it's a community that gets along, even if there are these very, very different views present. Which brings us back to the knife.
Yeah, you know, the knife, we chose to focus on the knife for this presentation because it's such an unassuming object, you know, and it for us really represents, you know, the thousands of objects in depots or in, you know, on display in a lot of museums in Europe, but also North America. You know, they all have a story, right? There's a story that is lost in most cases. So, you know, for us, that made it very important to create, to put a lot of effort into the virtual reality around this particular object. And, you know, there are many more stories out there, of course. And in that sense, you know, what we try to do with Loot 10 Stories is to really give audiences the feeling that there is a lot more out there, and that, you know, we don't know what's going to happen to it. We don't know if we don't know what's going to happen to, yeah, like Lieselore said, to the future of media or the future of museums, or how we present to audiences, how we present information. Do we do this through storytelling? You know, that's our conviction is that that is the right way to show these charged, difficult objects. But yeah, there it is. This is the photogrammetry in between of a Balinese Chris.
And one last thing, as we say thank you, if we have a moment where restitution is coming up as a discussion across all museums, and we have a simultaneous moment when the capacity for digital reconstructions or digital representations of objects that may be restituted is happening at the same time, we are at a convergence point that mirrors a convergence point that is happening in our society as a whole, which is that the distinction between the physical and the digital is falling away, and we are becoming a hybrid society of the digital and the physical. And we hope that the next generation of the museums will reflect this reality that we all live in. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. May I invite the speakers to...
Was that, did we go over? Did we go over? No.
You were completely in time. Thank you for that. Because we are going to have a discussion or questions answered, asked, and then we can go to the drinks and have some further discussions. Thank you so much, all four of you, and Eline and Kel. And I think it's very interesting to see all these perspectives and also the complexity of using the objects also again in these videos. And I think, videos, sorry, that's very old-fashioned. But also, as Lieselore showed, and it starts with data at the start of the research to find out where these objects might be coming from, if we can fill in all the holes and the stories we don't know. Are there any questions from the room? And there are many questions. Nasima.
What are the copyright issues that you face, and do you face any, and how do you answer them?
That's a really amazing question, because it unpacks a few different things. I mean, as far as the actual finished virtual reality and video works, and the overall concept of the show, I mean, our company, owns the copyrights. And so then we get into the actual digital assets, and in a way, like, we were dealing with, you know, new everything, you know? So, I mean, we are not currently attempting to hold copyright on any of the individual digital assets. Our belief is that there should be some protection around them, but at the same time, if you come to our breakout session tomorrow, you will see that it's not going to matter in a little while, because Luma AI and Gaussian splatting, the process of essentially digitally capturing objects using a cell phone, will within 6 months be as at a level as the photogrammetry scans that you see here, and then it's just going to be like taking a picture. And digital doubles will basically exist for every object. I mean, we will be showing a film tomorrow of a guy walking around the Uffizi with an iPhone, doing a Luma AI capture of an object, and then basically being like, well, what do I do with this? Do I 3D print it, or do I do that, and do it not? So yeah, I mean, the reality is moving faster than the law can move. Does that answer your question?
Well, somewhat, but there are more issues, but maybe we can...
Sure. Yeah.
I think Lieselore also mentioned that with the skull, that people said, okay, can we use it because we want to print smaller ones here? Okay, and you can sort of not stop that in a way, I think. But there was also a question over here.
Thank you. My name is Paul Voogd, Missie Museum Stijl.
Oh, I love your museum.
Oh, we were supposed to.
We're so excited to go to the opening. Well, we may not make it to the opening. Yes.
You're most welcome. My question is to Lieselore about the skull. Could you tell a bit more? What was the idea in the first place? Was it to restitute the real skull and keep the 3D print in the museum, or was it just for research purposes, or what was the initial reason?
Yeah, it was Daniel, the artist, who approached me because he wanted to do a restitution claim on the object and to kind of bring it back to Owaka, where it's supposed to be. And of course, with restitution, it's obvious there's a lot of examples where it went completely wrong, because museums here are, of course, very concerned about the original object, the original materials. That's documentation. You can do research on it. And returning it is not only losing a very beautiful object, but also this documentary source. And the fact that it's here is, of course, also part of the narrative of the object. In general, it's usually the case that the community of origin is either not involved because they want the object back, of course, it means losing a precious object. And in this case, I was very interested in this because what argument do you still have if you can create the perfect copy and display it and actually still tell the story and then have the skull restituted to the community of origin, for instance? So that's also kind of what triggered me. But of course, it's way more complex because we still do not know, and we're still researching if it really came from place X in Owaka. Otherwise, you're just returning your objects to an uncertain place, and that's legally not allowed and everything. So this was basically the motive around it. And I also kind of wanted to see, because I'm very fond of reproductions, obviously, but a lot of people are not, because it doesn't have aura and it's not important and it's just fake and it's bad and it got bad connotations. So this was kind of, for me, also a way of seeing and kind of understanding and demonstrating how reproductions can be socially relevant in these instances, and if they provide a way of talking about authenticity in a more diverse way. And it got really complex. That's basically what happened.
There's a question in the back.
Where in the back? Raise your arm.
Miss Noah, I'm a student, and I was wondering, Lieselore, what were your considerations for choosing the materials for the reconstruction of the skull, especially the decoration of the mosaics? I saw one of the pictures, you had a tube of Amsterdam acrylic paint, which really fascinated me. I was wondering, did you choose these materials because they are so distant from the original materials used, and therefore you want to make sure it is of course it is like a reproduction, so you can never achieve like the original meaning of it, or like what kind of considerations did you take in account when choosing these materials?
Yeah, good one. Well, it was basically because of 3D printing, and it also kind of showed me the limitations of it, because I chose to use resin because you can also print in ceramics, which is closer to bone, of course, and to the mosaics that were printed on it. But the material feel would not be right, the resolution would not be precise enough, and simply because acrylic paint attaches in the most durable way, or is the most useful in the when you want to paint a 3D print. So that's really why. And well, also because of the kind of the restrictions and the limitations of the scan and the 3D print, in the end, using acrylic paint, it turned out in a way that it looks like a reproduction and that it feels like that. which also showed me the limitations of using 3D printing. But it was not purposefully done to actually make sure that that people don't mistake it for a reproduction. That was not the thought behind it. It was just, what kind of materials do I have to do this as closely to the original as possible? So that's basically it. It was very technology driven in that sense.
Okay, thank you.
And there's another question over there. Yeah, thank you.
Hi. Hello. My question is to Dr. Rota about the computer-read provenance.
Could you please state your name shortly?
I'm Camilla, Camilla Catania from the Adlos Register. So the project is very interesting for provenance researchers because it will really have a massive impact on the future of provenance research and also how we are going to research provenances in the future. And I was wondering how the computer manages to deal with discrepancies in provenances, which you find if you look at a catalog raisonné, for instance, and other documents that might come afterwards, or provenances that come afterwards, which is something a provenance researcher always struggles with, deciding what is correct, why has it changed, how has it changed, and how a computer can recognize that. And then also another aspect of that is, of course, with the format, the AAM format, which is well known, but it sometimes is still not reliable when you see provenances online or in other sources, that you can't always 100% rely that the semicolon really means the continuous provenance. So I was very interested in that.
Yeah. Both, sort of two questions, right? I try to, which one do I tackle first? Contradiction. It's sort of what we have under this little term subjectivity. And it's a common thing. I mean, well-written provenances actually have many contradictions or have levels of uncertainty. The AAM guide suggested to use the words possibly or probably. So you have already a level of uncertainty that humans have came up with in the English language, and then you have this distinction. Of course, if someone then says likely or most likely or perhaps, you already get more messy and it becomes more problematic. What actually did that person who wrote that provenance mean? So then it becomes problematic to query it. But the contradictions are more easy. But in the data modeling that we try, and then it becomes really complex, we really try to capture it, but also keep it with the provenance of the provenance. And there is a whole, I mean, it's also a very philosophical argument of like someone's data is someone else's metadata, and where does the metadata and the data of someone else's metadata start? Because you do come, when do you start to question is? But there is, I mean, CDOC CRM that not a single museum in the entire world actually fully uses has come up since 40 years with like making the most complex ontology for exactly these questions, and then how do we transfer that into linked open data? And this is where Fabio Mariani now really works on, is like he wants to use nano publication, sort of just like keeping the provenance of provenance, and then you can query, show me how have provenances changed. Like, yeah, we are doing a little side study on looking at a catalog raisonné and then using the updated provenance and how many more women were added, for example, when you look at European. How many more agency can you trace? So, yeah, sorry, I'm also tired, so I'm losing it a bit and do not want to get too anecdotal. But yes, the contradiction is, the important thing is how to record it as provenance of provenance and the metadata aspect. The second thing was, no, I wouldn't trust any provenance. I mean, I don't trust provenance I have written 8 years ago, because it is shocking how much interpretation goes into this. It's still, I used to work at a Museum of Modern Art. I know exactly that one provenance I wrote likely instead of possibly or probably. It still bugs me. And this is where I mean, I argue, and with Evelyn Kampfens, who just did the study for the European Union, why I believe we do need people who are in this like provenance data world come together and come up with some, what is the language we use? Do we agree on probably and possibly, and what are the two German words? And then everyone can have different opinions about it, but we need to agree kind of in a language what we mean to then try to be as representative as possible in the data. I hope that answered it.
These kind of things are a start, a starting point,
yes,
and I think that's very good. Just like icon class,
exactly,
etc., etc. There are ways that we can talk to one another with our databases and connect the database together via linked open data. So I think it's a start.
And it works very well with German and English because there is mass digitization of data that happened in the past. So and it works with any big enough corpora. Then it doesn't need to be the AAM format. We are using Paese project data, for example, for the.
I've got a question to Kel and Eline. What were your doubts? Because I can also imagine you made this exhibition and you talked to people and then you thought about, okay, this is how we're going to do it. But it's still your view at the end of the day, your interpretation of what happened, of the story, so to say. So I can imagine you also had a lot of discussion of how can we tackle this? How can we do justice to all the stories?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we put it in a presentation a little bit that oftentimes to take a subjective approach or to take a first-person narrative approach to difficult subjects, and in this case, objects, is a way to deal with you know, what's so difficult about expressing. I do want to say, Lynn, you did break the rules by wearing red. Sorry, just noted. No, I'm sorry. It's getting later.
Well, I actually wanted to. I wanted to say one thing, not about the red, but actually, when the process that Liselore was talking about going through this, you know, this like regret or fear or what if I did the wrong thing or what if I mean, the practice develops over time, and there are going to be mistakes made along the way. And part of you can't move without making a mistake. You can't move without doing something that could potentially have a, you know, knock-on effect that could cause problems. And the question is, do we want to move, or do we want to stay calcified? Do we want to take that risk to move? And I mean, different people can position themselves differently to that question, but Eline and I, we are movers. And Liselore, you're a mover, and Lynn, you're a mover, and it does.
I'm a shaker.
Yeah, I'm a yeah. I'm actually I'm a joker. But yeah, I mean, so. But it's a movement with the goal of illuminating the mystery of life and bringing more justice into the world. So if that backfires, if that's a mistake, if it's done in the wrong way, all we can really do is apologize later and revise our practice. And there's certainly that's a possibility.
You know, a lot of the work starts with a question, a lot of self-initiated work that we make. And in this case, one of the origin points was an interest that we had in knowing how to exhibit something that is in a way unexhibitable, because it's so charged, it's so controversial, it has been, you know, labeled as, you know, too hard to handle. Is there a way? And you know, we work in immersive media, so of course we are thinking in that direction. Is there a way to show it? Yeah.
Can I sort of trying to in this sort of reacting to this, not to the fact of wearing red. It's because I'm working with text, so I have to stand up against the image.
Okay.
But more.
How's that going?
But but more importantly, I think that it's always a representation in the digital, but it's also a representation when we write a book. And there is, I think, like, can we do justice to history? Can we do justice to the complexities? No, we probably can't. You can't do it with whatever. Neither can the data, the text, whatever we write about it, do it justice. But we can. I mean, one step is to actually acknowledge the subjectivity, the like unknowns, the like missing knowledge, and taking it as a learning process. And I think, I mean, as Siraj said, it's like decolonizing is actually very, I mean, it's cumbersome, it's complicated, it will take very long. It will take in images, in our thinking, etc. So I think this learning is really what we should stress, and the subjectivity that is in every image and in every text embedded.
There's also a reaction over there.
I'm Dilip. The great work you're doing, I'm sure analytics would catch on, and the 3D printing as well. But my question is for Kel and Eline, because I've been struggling with sort of trying to communicate the history, the colonial history of the VOC of Sri Lanka. Because unlike Suriname and Indonesia and so on, which is still living in the Netherlands, it's alive, it's very close. The Sri Lankan, the VOC period of Sri Lanka ended quite a while ago, right? So it has receded in the memory of the Dutch as well as the Sri Lankan. So I've been wondering the best way you could increase or increase the historical awareness of this period for various reasons. And I'm very curious to understand the process that you all went through when you chose this sexy method of VR. Of course, it's tech and stuff like that. I used to be a designer myself in my last life. So if you want to reach a larger audience, because we are even here, you're in certain ways limited, even though it's very nice. You get a bit dizzy sometimes in one of them, but how can you reach a larger audience? Because I'm thinking back when we used to put 3D glasses, right? And a lot of people could sit in a theater and see a movie. So would that be a format, maybe, I don't know if it's cost effective, but would that be something that could be interesting to reach a larger audience with maybe simpler technology? Totally,
100%. And I think that, well, first of all, I want to just acknowledge Sri Lanka's place in our creative practice. So we started that project Empire in Sri Lanka in 2010. Yeah. So we were in residence at Tirta, outside of Colombo. And we were invited, or we sought out the House for Burger Ladies, which is obviously post-colonial residue, in a way. And yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating history, and obviously it's woven into it's woven into literature as well in really interesting ways. And yeah, so yes, but as far as any storytelling technology, we always have to analyze sort of the reach versus rich. So it's like a richer storytelling technology, one that's more immersive, most of the time has less reach. It just does, right? It's much easier to show people a movie on a screen, or in the case of His Name Is My Name, a video on a phone, right? But we did have a meeting with COSM, which is this full dome projection company that basically is doing these incredibly immersive, like beautiful full dome projections that are as transportive as anything that you see in VR. We don't know what it's right for because we don't tend to start with the tools, we start with the story, but help is on its way.
Can I add something to that? I think a lot of young people today are really interested in LPs, right? Like records. So it's not so much about like running to the next technology and like, you know, what are the kids doing? You know, it's like, I think that if you're researching, telling a specific story, and you're wondering about ways to tell it to your audience, consider the place that different technologies already have in, you know, the place that you live, for example. If you want to communicate something to a massive audience, I would go for a cell phone, something that you make for a cell phone. The project we keep mentioning, His Name is My Name, for example, the sound that we had a composer and we did a sound mix and it's a voiceover. It's mixed to sound really well on a mobile phone, not on a television, not in a theater. So, yeah, I think if you focus on the details of certain technologies and the, of course, environment that your audience finds itself in, I think that can inspire you to figure out like how to get your story across.
Yes, there's a question over here.
Yes, thank you. Also to comment upon the last question, there is also some controversy surrounding the use of AI. So I was wondering how you feel about that, and especially when we're talking about colonial collections, for example, because there's not a lot of imagery that is there, and what is there is also from a colonial perspective. So, for example, you might be contributing to also whitewashing history all over again. So, just wondering.
Okay, so currently the only way that AI is used in our practice is for like sound sweetening and things like that. I'm very interested in using generative AI as a tool. I think both Eline and I have a strong interest in that. But I really think that Lynn is the one to address that question. Because you're basically talking about like text to image, or overall just AI.
Especially if you're trying to reconstruct visually histories, like you've been doing now.
We don't use AI though.
Okay, that's a very relevant answer.
Yeah.
Because I thought that you mentioned it before in one of the answers.
There's an augmented reality filter connected to His Name is My Name. If anybody has their phone, just follow His Name is My Name on Instagram. It's really good. But yeah, we don't actually use AI. The only time that we used AI on this, oh no, actually, I'm lying. We used AI twice. We used AI to up-res a card from the Humboldt Forum's collection, from the Ethnology Museum's collection, because they couldn't find the card. And so we only had a very low-res version of it, like a low-res scan. So we had to figure out a way, and Julia Jimenez, who's our amazing editor, up-resed that card, which was great. So no need to find that card. And then the other way that we use it is we had an interview that had really bad sound, and then our sound designer was like, the only way that we can fix this is to do an AI analysis. And then he did an AI analysis, and he basically was able to massage it into something wonderful. But when it comes to AI, not only does Lynn have things to say about this, but Lynn's partner also has a lot to say about this.
But then I stick with the AI on the text, which is also, I mean, for us it is actually every half a year the progress is really enormous what you can do with it. I mean, bringing provenance on text to tables, there might be actually, large language models that might help us do that even faster than we are doing it now with the training. And especially for the languages, German and English, as I said, and French, I mean, you won't have this same success with Finnish or with Hungarian or Estonian, because there's just not much. So then the AI is, and it's a different conversation, it's very critical, but for us it's an extremely helpful tool for the cumbersome structuring.
Are there any more questions from the room? Klaas.
Thank you very much, also for the presentations. I had several questions, but I tried to keep it with one. I really like the VR possibility and the fact that we can now maybe use it again and again in exhibitions. I was wondering, why do you, and this is also maybe a question for the exhibition makers, you focus, of course, on the moment of injustice, which makes sense. That's what you want to address. But at the same time, for instance, in the VR installations, as a looker, as a visitor, as someone who sees it, you're not really part of the story. You're more like a fly on the wall. Did you? Yeah, I guess you thought about this. You could also maybe make it more, make the visitor part of the story by some interactive thing. And also in a way that, so what I also said in my presentation, when you focus on the moment of injustice, there's also this ongoing injustice, if you will, of people visiting the museum and maybe doing time and again, looking at other cultures in a way. So you could also maybe do make visitors part of a story in the 19th century where they look at this kris maybe 20 years after it was looted. And we are basically in the same tradition, even today, in this museum.
Maybe the visitor can save the object from being looted.
I mean, yeah.
That's not possible.
I think it's like Shiraz also said, the injustice is not in the past. It's still with us. And just like the decolonization or colonization, it's not in the past. It's still with us. I think that's what you want to say. And by bringing it to the past, that's the only question you can ask in the VR. Why it's a still, so to say. So it's how can you are now, but you see the moment of injustice. I think that's a bit what you mean. But you're looking really puzzled now.
Well, yeah, just because, I mean, I don't... well, first of all, I love questions like that because they're actually suggestions for things that you can do later in your institution. Absolutely, and you should. But when it comes to that specific, like say the Chris piece, just getting people to acknowledge that there was injustice at any point when it comes to specifically Dutch colonialism is still an ongoing process. And I think it's actually quite interesting, you know, this idea that it's like, oh, well, we could just, you know, can't we just imagine it? You're starting at a place where you know so much more. And you've spent so much of your life investigating, you know, these specific topics in the museum context. That is not, like, I mean, I know you guys know this, but like, how many people here have seen Black Panther? Black Panther? Like, how many people here have seen that? Okay, so like, I'm seeing a lot of younger people raising their hands.
About a fictional country.
And I'm seeing a lot of older people who are in control of museums and museum collections not raising their hands. Black Panther has a scene where the ostensible, he's raising, he's getting it. Black Panther has a scene where the ostensible villain poisons a museum curator, takes back an African mask that was taken from his people, puts it on, and just lays waste to a museum. And when we saw it in LA with a typically LA multicultural audience, there were cheers. So that's the conversation that's going on outside of this room. That's the way that this topic is being debated outside of this room. So like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I totally get it. I totally get it. Like, you know, let's educate the people in a very specific way. But like, the people are already kind of educated, and they already like have their opinions, and you know, maybe they're not as informed as our opinions in this room, or as we think our opinions are in this room. But like, yeah, like it's a different world out there, you know.
But I think the specific choices we made in the VRs that it sounds like you've already seen are based on the partially limitations of technology. What makes it convincing? You know, we're pulling a trick, you know, on you. Like, it's not real, and it feels real. Why does it feel real? Well, there are many decisions you're making together with, you know, the technical people who make these kinds of experiences. But I think that what was so important to us in this case is that you're a witness to history. And it's not about your particular place in it, you know. It's this persistence of the object, you know, in a digital imagined history, and then also, hey, it's right in front of you in a gallery that is, you know, lavender colored and is kind of alienating. So, you know, these different layers of information that the gallery has is, you know, we try to create a complete experience and not just focus on, I mean,
thank you.
Now I want to make something else.
Thank you all for your contribution and also for your remarks, and also the room. I'm going to wrap it up. And there's a lot been said today, and I think the room actually is quite aware that there's a whole world out there with people who are much further in their way of looking at the world and thinking the new normality, I would like to say. But we are talking here, and I think that's very good, we're talking here about words, about definitions about the role of the museum. What is a museum? How, in hindsight, can we make laws that can apply for these kind of situations? How to tell stories, how to connect with people through 3D imaging, through everything. So, and it's also about sustainability, about how can we bring this subject to the future without that it's been thrown back at us because we forgot about a large part, to deal with a large part of the problems or the thoughts, or as Nazima beautifully said, if we don't use the law, then it's going to get back at us at a certain point. If we just do it to be nice or to be, you know, then it's going to get back at us at a certain point. So having said that, I think it's been a very fruitful day, and it's just day one. And I would like to thank all the speakers for today, but I would also like to thank the organization. And that's if you all can stand, it's Suzanne, it's Shaila, it's Daphne, it's Shannon, Vera in the back, making photos, Denise, Berber. There's someone taking notes, Christy, I don't know where she is. But it's been a wonderful day, and thank you so much for this fine organization, and I thank you so much for joining us today.